The first cookhouse that I really remember well would be back around 41. I would be around 4 years old, but that was at the Lower Mill, and the Mooseland Lumber Company operated it. And it was a nice big cookhouse, all shingled, painted red, beautiful building, had the bunkhouse up above and the cookhouse below. They had their own barn, they had big pigs there, and horses in the barn. And actually, when my brother-in-law Henry came back from overseas, they had a big reception for him in the cookhouse, and the bunkhouse was a big building, like. And later years after that, it was tore down when the mill was stopped. Well, they were built out of 2x4 and board. They were all boarded in. Our camps that we had were a lot more modern than the older ones before that, because sometimes they used to use brush on the roof to shelter it and stuff. But we always tar papered. The camp was built out of good wood, good lumber, and tar papered, and they were warm. We had big army stamp, big Humdurgan stove, barrel stove. No problem, stay warm. Some nights it was too warm. You had the army cots, the double beds. There's lots of supply, and your bake pans were army. Your pots, your spoons, the big spoons, the potato mashers, and everything. So it was real good equipment, and your enamel plates and mugs, forks, most of it was all army stuff that was available after the war. Our camps were always down around Sawas Lake, 4 or 5 miles away from Mooseland. So we stayed and we slept in the camp, Murray too, my brother, and anybody that was working there. And the cook was Harvey Nookham. Any of the Nookhams are from there from Murphy's Cove, good cook, great cook. And Harvey would call everybody at 6 o'clock, you're out. Harvey would be up at 5 o'clock. You had bacon, beans, eggs, toast. You'd make toast, homemade bread right in the stove, and coffee and tea. And he would get up at 5 o'clock, and that would be all ready at 6 o'clock, just like that. And one of the regulations Harvey had, you didn't go to the table till he called you and told you it was ready. If you went in and sat down at the table, and sometimes guys would make a mistake, he'd chase them the hell out of that. But it was good food, and he made some of the best mincemeat pies that I ever ate. His stove was right in the kitchen, and that was mostly against that wall that partitioned off the cookhouse. His wood was piled in there to keep dry, and his kennels and all that stuff. And his bed was right beside the stove. So if he was well kept warm, and if he wanted to put a stick of wood in through the night, he just get out of bed and put it in. He didn't have to run around too much. And the water in the sink was over on the other side of the pantry, like. And his supplies it was shelving and stuff to put, like cases of milk and tomatoes, anything that was in cans that you bought in. So it was well organized. But the cook he had a special priority, he was kind of the boss in that area, and people, they lived according to the rules, And when you were done eating, you took your plate and your forks and knives and mugs over to the sink, and you stacked them and put them in where they're supposed to be. And then he washed them later. Breakfast, dinner, supper. Unless you're quite a ways away from the camp, well, then you'd carry a lunch. Bread, and cook would make you up a lunch. Mostly by the time you ate it in the wintertime, it was froze, cold. But you got a fire going and made a tea or whatever, and that kept you going until supper time. Your supper was at the camp.